Today's podcast is sponsored by my new favorite animated TV show, Tuttle Twins, the first cartoon series to teach kids principles of freedom, economics, and liberty, and to be funny in the process. Nowadays, hidden political agendas are constantly forced on your kids in entertainment and in schools. Tuttle Twins is a hilarious cartoon series that teaches kids about the principles of freedom without being overly preachy. It's educational and hilarious, and there are lots of jokes for adults too. The best part, you can watch Tuttle Twins entirely for free. Just go to TuttleTwins.tv, that is Tuttle Twins, TuttleTwins.tv, and over there you can watch all of the episodes for free. One more time, that's TuttleTwins.tv. Highly recommend it. Go check it out. What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Now, on today's episode, we have got on a Canadian author. She is a writer who has recently written a book called The Mind Under Siege: Mechanisms of War Propaganda. And this is Alexandra Kitty. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Most welcome. So I've done a brief intro right there, Alexandra, but for people who are not familiar with you, please introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm a former journalist who actually went into journalism to conduct experiments, why journalism was failing people, how to make it better and stronger. So I conducted literally hundreds of empirical experiments as a journalist, then went to write books starting in 2005, such as Don't Believe It, How Lies Become News, OutFoxed, Rupert, Murdoch's War on Journalism. And we are talking, I'm still going strong in writing books based on what I have discovered, working as a journalist, going in saying, okay, what's the structure? What's the scaffolding? Why do hoaxes make the news? Why do we feel the way we do? Do we get upset when we hear the news, or we get scared? And how do we do journalism when we're not upsetting people and violating their emotional rights?
Awesome. There's so much there to get into. But before we dive into that, how did you get into the world of journalism? Can you tell me a little bit about your journalistic career before you started writing these books?
Well, I wasn't going to be a journalist. I didn't even think that was a career. I was way back in the 90s. I was a psychology student, and I was studying experimental psychology. And then the war in the former Yugoslavia came out, and I could see that it was very, very skewed against the Serbs. It was bigoted. It was horrible. And I discovered way before we had, databases through the internet, that there were a whole bunch of PR firms that were hired. It was not like unlike the babies and incubators hoax that was perpetrated by Hill and Knowlton. So I said, well, how does this get through? What happens? So I said, well, I have all this knowledge as a psychology student. Why don't I use this and go and switch? So in the last semester of my studies, I had written a letter to 60 Minutes and telling them this, and they said, well, would you like to do some research? And I said, sure. And I thought, well, if I can do that, maybe I should go into journalism, but not going in, let's say, undercover, but going in as an experimenter. How does this process going where you have bad information or a bad narrative to polluting the information stream? So that's how I decided. So then I got my master's in journalism, and then I became a journalist, and that was my job. That was my career. So I worked as a journalist. So, I had to pay my bills as a journalist. So I was completely immersed because I was honestly a journalist. And then when I got enough information, I said, okay, let me analyze what I have. How did I pitch things? What was the best way to interview people? What was the most sensitive way to get this information that was different than what the standard was?
And was this all in Canada or elsewhere?
Well, I worked from Canada, but I wrote for different publications in the US. I was a Canadian correspondent for a magazine called Press Time, which was a trade magazine for people in the newspaper business. So I was writing about newspapers for a journalistic audience. So my experience was, throughout North America. And I found out a lot of things. A lot of my theories were wrong. and a lot of mine were right. And I learned from that, and I said, okay, how would you make this better? What did you learn? What would you do better? And then came my books. So the more I analyzed, the more I found, there were very simple solutions to regain trust, to have a more pluralistic and diverse product. It was fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're living in a time, and maybe it's always been this way, but certainly in the last few years, a lot of people are having issues with what they'd call mainstream media or MSM or the corporate press. What do you think, in your opinion, are some of the things that they're doing wrong? And do you think that it's different now to how it used to be in the past?
It's not too much different, is more people are aware of it. When it's just like regular, when you talk to somebody and somebody says something hurtful to one group or one person, and they keep doing that, more and more people start realizing this isn't, you think it's just you, maybe you did something wrong. But when you find other people who are in the same boat, you go, no, no, no. This is what happened with journalism. Was very simple. It was a one-way form of communications. So they didn't get feedback from people. No one could really tell. We all thought what we were thinking. Well, this isn't fair. This is not, you don't recognize yourself or your group from the media coverage. Who is this? Well, you don't, when you start comparing notes, and when you had social media come out where people could talk to each other and see it wasn't them, that's when things began, more people realized that, because journalism was what I call patriarchal authority. They had all the power of communications one way, and you couldn't come and challenge it. So that was their scaffolding. Social media changed it, where they no longer were the sole gatekeepers. And because, other people could talk, they had an outlet, they had alternatives and choices, and they would rather say it themselves than rely on the press to say it for them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are some of the biggest problems of the way the current mainstream media runs?
The lack of self-awareness is probably, the biggest problem. Have people tell you, okay, this isn't me, this isn't accurate. In a world of infinity, why do you have a single narrative? Why is it there's only one correct answer, one way of seeing the world, when there's so many? You can't have 8 billion people in one point of view or one solution that works for everybody. Mm-hmm. And when people ask this, and then, they get tarred and feathered in the press, you're this or you're that, and the name calling. I always said I always wanted an intervention for journalists, because they say hurtful things to people, and they think that they're correct, and they're not correct. I mean, we have different realities. My reality is not the same as other people's, and I want to know different realities. So why are we trying to push a single narrative on all, different people from different walks of life? That doesn't make any sense.
When you say that we all have different realities, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I come from a middle class, background in Canada. I'm not going to be the same, upbringing as somebody who's been brought up during war, or somebody who grew up among privilege. What you're protected from and what you have to face are two different things. And our minds leave impressions. So we are all different in that. We could have next door neighbors, same street, same a lot of things, or even the same household. Different things shape us, how we see the world, how the world treats us. So we have different things going for each other, and you can't expect, one size fits all narrative that the press has. We need to understand different people, from where they come from, what they do, and how they got there.
Mm-hmm. And from a corporate press perspective, what's the best way to portray that? I mean, what I'm understanding is you're saying that everyone has different life, different experience, different history, different personality, and so on. But if the job of the corporate press is, well, I'll question what the job is, but if it's supposed to be objective journalism and the reporting of the facts, then how can that be? How do you suppose that be balanced with this idea of people having different realities?
I think what things that you're doing or have people on Substack, when we have more individuals, let's say, striking it out on their own, that's how you get diversity and plurality. When you have one big corporate media, the problem is that you have people trying to rig an outcome. So you memorize, let's say, a certain set of rules. And in journalism, we have a concept called fit. So an article will get rejected because it doesn't fit with the narrative or the style or the audience. So everything gets excluded except a couple of little rules that people have to memorize. When you have a lot of more independent media, people who strike it out on their own, you're going to get more information that way because your point of view is going to be different than mine. And I like reading people from, let's say, Substack or Medium, because there's things that, as much as I'm in tune, there's going to be obvious things I'm going to miss. And I want to know what they are. That's how you understand things. And instead of having an antagonistic relationship with people, you can start negotiating. And it's a completely different ballgame.
I hear that. So you said that one key spark of this for you was the war in Yugoslavia, and you saw that very one way. Now, this is not something that I'm super knowledgeable about, or which I particularly remember myself at all, besides like some very, very basic stuff. But what was it that you were seeing going out at that time, and what was it that raised a red flag for you? Can you go into that in a little more detail?
Well, my background is I have relatives who are Serbian, Croatian, and they were there. And the war came out, and you could just see everything was the Serbs. They were doing this. They were evil. They were horrible. And it was war. So you're going to expect both sides. But then I would start seeing things in the press that were almost laughable because I understood the nuances of the culture of different people and different factions there. And I had relatives and I loved all sides. It's not like I was picking sides. But then when you would see, for instance, they had one point where Time magazine had a picture of all these graves, implying that these were people killed by Serbs, except these were crosses. So it wasn't Muslim graves. It could be either Croatian or Serbian. Serbs used Cyrillic. Croatians used the Latin alphabet, and these were Cyrillic. So these were mass graves of Serbian victims. And yet there was no mention. It was total different implications. So you start seeing little different things. You go, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. I would write letters and I would be dismissed. So I started doing more and more digging, finding out more and more information, because how does this get through? Well, I got a hold of the press releases they were using. So you had PR companies in Washington, D.C. sending information to reporters because they don't know the language there. They don't know the geography. They don't know a lot of things. So here's something prepackaged for you. This side paid us to give it to you. So that's what they ran with. And I said, that doesn't seem right to me. So I started looking more and more. And that's how I ended up going into journalism. Because how does this happen? How do we allow basically advertising to market a war?
Well, that's something that's been going on for many, many decades, or I assume centuries. I know your most recent book is about this topic of propaganda. So first of all, when you use the word propaganda, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, basically skewed coverage meant to incite people to give up their liberties, give up their lives, and go with something regardless of what their perceptions show. So if your perceptions tell you this is dangerous, I shouldn't give up my rights, I shouldn't go and hurt people, but you ignore it because you think you have no choice. So basically, propaganda is meant to incite you to do something that you normally would not do, that is violent, that is dangerous, that can totally imperil your life, but you think that's the way that's going to save you.
Mm-hmm. And what made you want to write this book in particular, especially in this time?
Well, I wanted to write it because I spent basically almost 30 years of my life researching how this came, because it was a war that inspired me to want to go into journalism. And I realized that when you talk to people a certain way about war, you can't reason. So even if the facts fly in the face of this, I knew had psychology, and I knew from my studying psychology as a student that when people hit a certain level of fear, they can't think anymore. There's sensory overload. And more and more when I was doing more research, because I didn't just look at it through the journalistic lens, I was looking at different experiments in psychology where we know, for instance, that when people can be told that there's going to be a curse on them and they'll die in an hour, and they will die even if they're perfectly healthy. This is what the brain does. So the brain is hardware, and this was not affecting your mind so much as your brain. So how does propaganda, how do these words impact your brain where you cannot think rationally? There were answers in psychology, but they weren't being applied to journalism. And it was a dangerous thing not to see how easy we can be manipulated by fear mongering. If we think, that's our evolutionary drives. If we think we're going to die, our brain works differently than during times where we have no stress and we think everything is fine.
Can you go into the psychological aspects of that in more detail? Because I think people would be curious to know why and how propaganda is so effective. We see this in the current era. We've seen this many, many times all throughout history. What is it in human beings that makes us so susceptible to propaganda?
First, in this society at least, we have an overemphasis on what I call analytical literacy. So basically 1 or 0. We can make two judgments if things are the same or different, or if one quantity is bigger than another. That's analytical thinking. But we have emotional thinking. We can have a feel for things. Do we like it? Are we scared of it? And then we have primal thinking, which is our survival in times of stress or progress in times of peace. Propaganda has to hit everybody equally, regardless of your background, regardless of your education, your beliefs, your religion. It has to hit in the first strike. You can't be given brain space to think. Because if you can start thinking, oh, this doesn't make sense, because some of these stories are so over the top ridiculous that it doesn't make sense. So I realized early on, propaganda ensures that our 3 functioning core literacies, analytical, primal, and emotional, have to be subdivided, and each has to be taxed with different methods of keeping us from being able to escape this prison. So if we have an atmosphere of imminent doom, that means our primal self will not be able to think of a solution. It will look to something else. If our emotional thinking is impacted by narrative, good versus evil, then we can't think of a different alternative explanation. If our analytical is clogged up with sophistry or bad logic, we're going to always find the wrong conclusion. So propaganda makes sure that we're running on this hamster wheel, that we cannot think for ourselves, that we have to rely on someone else to do our thinking for us.
And how does it change depending on what authority this comes from? Because one thing I notice a lot right now is the appeal to authority, right? So people are willing to go along with or not question anything as long as it comes from a perceived authority. And people are also willing to dismiss things that are true or interesting or questions worth asking if they don't come from some type of authority. So is this a way that the media takes advantage by using their authority?
They use authority by proxy. It's let's say from that person who has a title, has a label, that's the authority, and we cannot question that authority. And you hit the nail on the head. Appeal to authority is sophistry. It's faulty logic, and it's one of the most important aspects to confuse people through propaganda. This authority says so. This authority almost has like a godlike power. They know everything. They see everything. Their judgment is final. They can never be wrong. We can't question them. So they have this aura. And another way we can do things is what we call a confirmation bias. We're only given information that confirms a theory, not the ones that refute it. So you have an authority who's not challenged. We're rigging perception so that there is no plurality. There is no choice. There's only one option. And you have to realize, in a world of infinity, how can we have a single option? There has to be multiple options. That even by accident, by default, propaganda doesn't want you to question. You have to relinquish your free will. You have to relinquish your rights and freedoms, and you have to question yourself. You are not adequate. Somebody else has to do your thinking for you. And we have a term for that. That's cognitive outsourcing. You can't have outsourced your thinking to somebody else that you, quote unquote, are supposed to trust.
And how does this affect an individual versus groups? Is an individual more susceptible, or is a group more susceptible?
It depends on the situation. I would say it starts with the individual. The individual feels helpless. The individual then goes to other people who feel helpless, and they feed off each other. So I feel helpless, you feel helpless. We start to panic. And what do? Somebody comes in with an authority, says, okay, I have a solution for all of us. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to give up a lot. And then there'll be people who say, well, I don't want to give anything. Well, this person's an outsider. This person's a bad guy. This person is a traitor. We have to ignore this person or punish this person in order to keep the cohesion. So it starts like this, almost like a tumor. You have one cell, and then it suddenly, that individual cell bursts on, and it becomes a tumor. It grows. So we hope to stop at the individual, but if it goes to the group, that's when we're in trouble in terms of propaganda.
I hear that. One question I often have, and I wonder, is given what we know today about the way media operates and the power of propaganda, is throughout history, the history that we look at is, how much stuff, how accurate is it, right? How much stuff is not just what we've been told or the things that we read, but perhaps more so the things that are left out, because you can leave things out to, that's sort of lying by omission, or the sort of memory holding or deletion of certain things that happen, which, I mean, we've seen a lot over the past couple of years, but I often just think, man, throughout history, I wonder how much of what we know or what we think we know, how accurate is it, and how much stuff is there that we should know and that perhaps was incredibly important, but we don't know because all memory of it has been erased or intentionally diverted away from.
Well, it happens. And then you're not giving, people say people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But what history do you know? We don't, back, even decades ago, how much did we know about PR firms? How did we know about psychological experimentation, or what we call nudge units now? A lot of things we know only because of individual people telling us things. Like if we're looking at, that's why it's so important when I always talk about local information, talking to as many people who were there instead of relying just, let's say, on official sources where you interview people. I mean, I'll give you an example. In the Second World War, one of the crowning glories of the Second World War were hospital trains. This was used in the press to show, the strength of the Allied forces. Do we talk about hospital trains now? We don't even mention this. This is something very difficult. So even throughout the years, what was considered important during that era gets completely forgotten, and we don't understand the significance of things. We have constantly missing puzzle pieces, and if we don't have them, we don't have the big picture. So propaganda does try to erase so much, and if somebody wins over somebody else, they will just totally rewrite history, and we have no idea of the secret players or the secret deals or the secret heroes. We'll never find out about them because it's not convenient to a post-era narrative, and we'll just bury that person, and who will be there for anybody to speak up for them. That's why it's always important to document, and that's something with social media that's a sticking point for a lot of people who do like to use propaganda, because they will say something, but then you have a whole bunch of people telling you, having footage of something that's completely opposite. So you get a bigger picture. And this is why we're seeing, so much rebellion. It's because we even with censorship, even with everything else, there's still ways where we can find out information that does not go with a preset narrative.
Yeah, I hear that. One of the most concerning things about everything we're talking about is the way that it can be used to divide and pit people against each other. Again, seen this many, many times in history with some incredibly tragic and horrendous results. But I see it still every day. I see it every day. Perhaps not to the same level of vitriol as certain historic incidents, but there's are always these narratives, and it seems clear intentions to divide people. And I guess number one, do you see that as well? Do you think it's intentional? And if so, what do you think is the intent? Is it just about power? Is it about money? Is it about control? Why are
It,
they always trying to pit people against each other?
because we're talking about people who do that are not very competent. So we divide people. This is typical, a classic Machiavelli, where he was talking to the prince. You divide two group of people, make them hate each other. They're going to wear each other down. You come in and you have no challenge. You come in, you can take whatever resources are left. The people who fought the hardest, the first, will be too tired, too weak, and too demoralized to be any opposition. And so this
Hmm.
is how we can have people who can be very conniving, but they're not very, let's say, smart, not very able, because they have worn down people. They've worn down people. Propaganda is a misdirection. War is a misdirection. If we didn't have war, we could see what are all the deficits in society, who's stealing money, who's discriminating against people just so they can put their friends in charge instead of taking who's of quality and having new innovations, having new rules to remember. So the reason we have war, the reason we have division, is so people can take your resources and you not notice it because you're so frazzled, you're so worried about your family, you're worried about your life, your future, everything you've built up that takes a lifetime. They can knock it down, not just physically, your reputation. How many people
Hmm.
have been, trying to help other people? They get labeled a villain, and they're never the same. They're totally broken, and the propagandists can just waltz in, pretend that that they've done something constructive, when how they've gotten it is just totally by stealing resources from innocent people.
Do you think that propaganda is always going to work? Is this just something that human beings are destined forever to be susceptible to this degree, or are there some solutions here?
Actually, it's very simple. First, when you realize that there could be propaganda, you you start seeing it everywhere. Once you see propaganda, you can't unsee it. This is something,
Hmm.
that's the weakness of propaganda. And it's smash and grab. It dazzles you. It's a misdirection right then and there. It has to work on first strike. And when you start being able to see things and you talk to other people and you trust your own judgment, if you have primal literacy and emotional literacy, where you have confidence in your own perceptions, propaganda doesn't work. You start asking questions, propaganda doesn't work. If somebody
Hmm.
tells you a story, you go, what PR firm was that? It doesn't work because you start questioning. So propaganda seems like we can't, it sucker punches you. That's, if you're walking down the street and somebody punches you in the face, you're not going to expect it. But if you know that somebody's out to get you, you know how to avoid it entirely. You might want to
Hmm.
smack them first. You might want to change the direction you go. You will never fall for it again. So propaganda, what's required is, you know, finding out what it looks like, because it doesn't change. As I said, people who use it, they're very conniving, but they're not clever. So they might pour billions of dollars in seeing how we can be manipulated. But if you know the tricks, it's like a magician's stage show. You know the tricks. You're not going to get impressed once you know the tricks. You go, I see the trick wire. Oh, I see the other person underneath the curtain. Oh, that's the assistant scantily clad. So I look at her and not at what the magician's doing. It's not
Hmm.
as frightening once you realize the tricks.
But how do we encourage people to learn that? Um, what is it that could wake people up to it? Because it always seems to be a minority. Um, who is willing to recognize this, and I guess also in particular to speak up about it. But oftentimes it looks like this is just running unopposed and unchecked.
It sometimes seems that way if we look just, let's say, at the mainstream media, and if we look at their ratings and circulation, they've been in decline. On the other hand, what we've seen a big rise is in independent media, independent journalism. And that's where people are going for information. So you don't need a majority of people to see it. You need a sizable minority of people who say it. And you're not going to expect everybody to agree with you. That's organic plurality. That's the reality of the situation. It's just that more and more people, as you know, if you have have shows and you talk and other people talk and exchange, then other people do start to calm down. So if you don't take an antagonistic approach to people who believe it, and you tend to be much more patient and less antagonistic, then people feel safer in lowering their defenses. Because if they're taking their cues from other people and you show that you're calm and you're not afraid, then you're leaving cues as well as the propagandist who's relies on being very unpleasant, from being very narcissistic, hogging all the spotlight to themselves and nobody else. And if you start pointing out obvious things, well, okay, all these people want us to harm ourselves and they're getting rich. And how well are you doing? Are you doing what, better financially or not? Just things like that, getting people to kind of calm down. And once people are primed, it is hard to get them unprimed, but it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm. What are your concerns with where this all goes or where it's all going? I've spoken to a lot of people who feel like the modern Western world in particular is on some type of precipice, and that things are weird, and they're concerned about the division and the polarization and so on. Where do you think this goes? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Or is it nuanced? What do you
Well,
think?
I think I'm in the nuanced camp. I think that there's groups of people who are totally prisoners of their own mind. They're totally afraid, and they are just spinning on this hamster wheel. And those are the people who I feel for, because they're living in abject terror. They're harming themselves in the process. And yet you have this rising group of people who are saying, no, I'm not going to buy the mainstream narrative, and I'm doing things my way. Yes, you're going to give me grief, but I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. And a lot of times people who pretend to have power will make threats, and they'll say, well, we'll label you, as a villain. Well, okay, fine. I'm a cool outsider rebel. Why do I care? I don't want to march lockstep. So what I see is a group of people probably never would have been more rebellious, who would suddenly find their voice and their footing. And that's how you get change. It's one at a time. And you have to always understand propaganda is used because there is incompetence somewhere and there's a scandal that needs to be hidden. So the propaganda is not a communications of people who are in a position of strength, but weakness. And they're trying to hide that weakness with everything they got, because to expose it will show you just how weak they are. So when people can stand up to that, those are the people who are the future leaders of tomorrow. So I'm optimistic that we'll get through this. I mean, human beings are resilient. They're brilliant. They can be kind-hearted. They can be all sorts of things but usually we find this out when we're in a turn of a scandal or in a depression. So people, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it better. It's just that it's not everybody's going to get through it, because the people who are imprisoned in fear, they think it's safer to be afraid than to just say, you know what, maybe this is just an illusion and I should push myself out of this prison.
Mm-hmm. And Alexandra, you've been working on a new book. Is that right? You're writing another one. Okay. You're writing a lot of books here. So what is this next book going to be about?
I have a book called Therapeutic Journalism, and it's about how to use psychology to make people braver, to present information through the lens of a clinical psychology. So why do we need fear mongering? Why do we need division? Why would we put people on a pecking order, especially when that pecking order is made up? This is my this is the reason I wanted to go into journalism, because psychology and journalism go hand in hand. So why are we making people afraid? Why are we narrowing and confining and constricting people and their potential? You think of all the, ideas, inventions that we've missed out on because people were made afraid or made angry. And that's not, how we progress society, not by taking away things from people, but by giving things to people. And therapeutic journalism is a system. I said it's not with narrative. So we don't tell people how to think or what to think about things. We don't use sophistry. We don't use atmosphere. People, rose to the challenge when bombs were falling and people were dying of illness. And all of a sudden they rebuilt society. I mean, we as human beings are a tough lot. We shouldn't, sell ourselves short and infantilize ourselves when we are capable of so much more. So I wanted to develop a system of journalism where that is fostered and people don't, think that they have to take things away from other people to gain things, because that's just ridiculous.
Out of all the books you've written, what are you the most proud of and why?
Well, I would have to say Therapeutic Journalism and Mind Under Siege are my core favorites. Mind Under Siege because it took me 30 years to do the research, conduct the experiments, and look at psychology, read psychology's experiments, see which ones were good experiments, which ones were bad, then go out in the real world and test them for myself. Then how do I put it in journalism? Therapeutic journalism this is how communication should be. You shouldn't be made terrorized even when the chips are down. You should say, okay, what's within me or what's with, people around me that we can go and make something better. I mean, I'm not talking in an optimistic Pollyanna way. I mean, people survive plane crashes. People survive, mass shootings. People survive absolute abject poverty and war and discrimination and absolutely everything. And they rise to the challenge. So, as human beings, that's what we should be looking. We should be looking upwards and forwards, and we shouldn't be looking downwards at people, because then there's something wrong with you, not the other person.
Can you tell me a little bit more about these experiments? You said when you were in journalism, you wanted to do and you conducted experiments. Can you go into that on a little more detail?
Well, I took it out of the laboratory. So I would, for instance, to see what editors were looking for. So I would pitch the same story to different editors, maybe, let's say, have a cocky attitude in some, or have a more appeasing attitude. Which one would editors more likely take? What was it the position they wanted? I would go to different job interviews at different media outlets. Was there potential of sexual harassment? Were they telling me what to think and how to think it? How did they look at somebody who was female? Then I would, let's say, do interviews with people. If I have a lot of questions or long-winded questions, how would they respond? If I sat silently, would I get better information? And by the way, if you sit quietly and you let people talk, you get far more better information, more accurate and realistic than if you just keep firing in questions to them. So I would learn how to ask questions that gave me good information, truthful and accurate information. I would say, how do I verify information? I would try different things and I would write my results. How many facts did I get? How many facts did this person tell me that were accurate? And then I would go back, refine the experiment. So that's what I would do in terms of, okay, what do media outlets look for? I mean, it's not this, vast conspiracy. It was just the mindset of people, and then they would look for other people with the same mindset and then just reinforce this very limiting scaffolding in the profession that was causing them increasingly bigger problems because they couldn't shift to the change of the internet at all. They thought this was just a passing fad.
What was the biggest takeaway from all of this, or something that your perspective really shifted on? Because you said when you went into journalism, there were some things that you thought or believed, and then that it was very different. And then you said other ones you went in with a certain idea and it confirmed it. Can you give an example of one or two big takeaways just in terms of how this whole machine works?
Well, one thing that I did, I was right about was the fact that this was a profession that was applied psychology, and yet you didn't have a single journalist who had any clue about psychology, not one editor. I remember, this was before I went into journalism, was watching a news report, and we were in Florida at the time, and this 12-year-old boy saw his estranged father murder his mother right in front of his eyes. And the reporter, this was like within an hour after this happened, stuck a microphone in this weeping 12-year-old's face and asked him what happened. I mean, this could not have been more horrific. That I came in thinking that it was confirmed. This was a very insensitive profession. I thought it was much more, let's say, by design, that you had this kind of corruption. That was just sort of a benign. This was taken for granted. This was a self-serving mechanism. People who came in didn't necessarily come in with an agenda. That's just what happened because, they had all the power. And because there wasn't that feedback of social media, they weren't corrected by a public saying, no, that's not correct. Could you correct the record, please? So it was by the fault of the profession where it was one way. That's why journalists got reinforced with all the wrong things. So all their bad habits were reinforced completely unintentionally. That was not by design. That was just unforeseen consequence.
What are things people can do to protect themselves against propaganda? How can they inoculate themselves from this?
But first of all, they have to learn to not react, but reflect. So if you hear a piece of information, the sky isn't falling. Second of all, you should always ask who paid for the coverage. So a lot of times, you're going to go, okay, what PR firm? So you can look at what the PR firms are. You can look at different reports. You can talk to people, and you can have a default assumption that, that there's at least two sides or more to every story. So if you have a single narrative and everything else is wrong, that's your first red flag that you're being lied to. That's if nothing else, say, what does the other side have to say about it? And don't dismiss it just because it's a different side.
I hear that. And Alexandra, where can people find you online? What's the best place?
AlexandraKitty.com is my website. I do that. They can, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn. So if somebody wants to reach out, that's wonderful. If you have questions about propaganda and specific studies, I am more than willing to share.
Awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't touch on?
No, I think we were very thorough, and you actually asked wonderful questions. It was really very thought-provoking. And if other people asked questions in the press, they would get a lot better answers. So to me, it's just never stop asking questions. That I still do. I don't think you know everything. I think people come with absolutely no knowledge, and then they come in thinking they can know everything or fake. You can't. You learn. You get feedback. You admit your gaps in your knowledge. I don't think that I'm foolproof either. So to this day, I'll go, okay, was I right? Was I wrong? Okay, find out. Even, your ego, don't tie your ego to your opinion.
Absolutely. Alexandra Kitty, thank you for coming on the Real Talk with Zuby podcast.
Thank you so much.